Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into one of ancient Rome's more peculiar roles, the orgy planner. Yes, someone had to manage the wine, supervise the grapes, coordinate entertainment, and make sure no one accidentally brought their mother-in-law. While it might seem outrageous, or even excessive, these events were about more than indulgence. They were deeply tied to status, power, networking, and admittedly, quite a bit of nudity. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Only if you genuinely appreciate the content. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing the global community gather here. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that calming background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey. Your eyes snap open before sunrise. Not from discipline but anxiety. You're tonight's designated planner for an elite Roman gathering, and your brain's already listed 17 potential disasters. The sleeping mat is still warm, your tunic is crumpled, and a scroll has just been shoved under your door. It crackles, ominously. You unroll it with the grim focus of a soldier reading a conscription notice. It's from your patron's wife. She reminds you that last time the rose petals were yellow, not red, and people noticed. You haven't even touched your barley yet, but Rome is already stirring. And you're mentally juggling flaming amphorae. Tonight's guest list includes senators, artists, philosophers, and 2 courtesans who despise each other. There's also talk that someone from the imperial family may attend. No one tells you who. Might be a cousin, might be Caligula. Either way, if someone's peacock isn't adequately pampered, it'll be your fault. You slip into your sandals and begin the day, clipboard in hand, already filled with dread. First item, staffing. You sent runners to book flute girls, dancers, a harpist, and a man who balances figs on his feet while walking on his hands. None have confirmed. You suspect at least 2 are drunk in the Subura. Then there's the food. You've ordered oysters, honey-roasted dormice, figs, dates, olives, and some dubious meats from the eastern provinces. Everything must arrive fresh, or at least convincingly so. A single bad oyster, and you'll be accused of poisoning a senator. And don't forget the seating cushions. Last time, one collapsed under a toga-clad magistrate and caused political fallout. This time, everything must be sturdy enough to withstand. The evening's usual activities. It's not even noon, and you're already sweating into your linen. You take a breath. You remind yourself you are a professional, a maestro of chaos, a conductor of controlled debauchery. It's going to be a long day. But the cushions will be fluffed, the wine will flow, and the guests will have no idea how close you came to losing your composure. A new scroll arrives, today's updated guest list. You read it carefully, bracing for bad news. It's not just names, it's a precariously balanced social minefield garnished with olives. Lucius Calpurnius Piso is attending, as always, and insists on the center couch, preferably next to someone else's wife. His own wife, Aurelia, is also coming, uninvited as usual. You note, separate couches, separate wine, and absolutely no harp music when both are present. Last time she hurled a garum jug. Senator Petronius Arbiter is attending. Witty and sharp. His insults are rarely poetic. You'll seat him far from Junius Blaccus, whose poetry he once described as a slow death in verse. Then an entry, Decianus plus 2 guests, unspecified, unacceptable. They could be clients, gladiators, or even a giraffe in formal wear. You scribble flexible seating West End and move on. As for entertainment, 4 flute girls, 3 dancers, and the infamous mime twins. That's one performer more than Lucullus prefers. He finds mimes vulgar. His mistress, however, finds them delightful, and her favor is vital to his public image. This guest list isn't just a roll call. It's a living diagram of Roman hierarchy, grudges, affairs, and unspoken rivalries. crammed onto silk-covered couches, drinking from the same communal bowl. And then, of course, the real fear. Someone important not being invited. You can already hear it. The whispers that it was deliberate, an insult, and now they'll never lend their bath slaves again. You roll up the scroll, start another, arrows, circles, caution notes. You're not organizing a party. You're orchestrating a diplomatic exercise with figs and incense. Still, you've handled worse. You'll manage again. You just hope this time no one draws a dagger over seat placement, not like last spring. With the guest list stable, for now, it's time to tackle provisioning. A Roman feast isn't about lighting torches and pouring wine. It's about curating a display so lavish the gods feel underdressed. Your list spans 3 wax tablets. First, the wine, only the finest, aged Falernian, costly enough to make your sponsor wince. You order 3 amphorae of Falernian, 2 of Cacuban for display, and 1 of vinegar for latecomers. Next, oysters. Imported from Baiae, alive on arrival or at least convincingly moist. Last time, half were dead, and 1 guest took it as a bad. Omen, he's still recovering. Honey-roasted dormice, a symbol of decadence, must be plump and rolled in poppy seeds. You ask for 50, you'll get 35, half still twitching. Roasted peacocks, stuffed sow's udders, dates from Judea, figs from Carthage, and vine-wrapped cheese round out the menu, and a reminder, no garum near the bread. Last event's anchovy-scented. Rolls nearly sparked a revolt. Desserts, candied nuts, almond cakes, and ideally, a cake shaped like the Colosseum filled with live birds. You'll sort out the baking logistics later. Perfumes? Myrrh, rose oil, saffron water, and enough incense to make a Vestal Virgin woozy. You make a note to discreetly scent the latrines. The scroll now resembles a military supply list more than a banquet menu. It's pricier than a countryside villa, but this is Rome. Extravagance is expected. Decadence is fashion. And your patrons. Reputation rests on guests being too stunned by luxury to notice the music's off, or someone spilled wine on the marble lions. You hand the scroll to your swiftest runner. No substitutions, no excuses. If he forgets the sugared grapes again, he's flamingo feed. Now a quick clarification, a vomitorium isn't what you think. Romans didn't build dedicated vomit rooms to make space for more food. That myth likely came from someone overwhelmed by Roman feasting habits. The word vomitorium actually referred to the exits of amphitheaters, where crowds spilled out. Still, popular imagination loves the idea of perfumed nobles throwing up between courses. In truth, guests might quietly step out to refresh themselves, and it was your job to make sure every area, from atrium to triclinium to private gardens, was prepared to absorb excess with dignity. Inspection begins. The banquet hall's floors must gleam. You spot a grape stem wedged between mosaic tiles from last week's event. Gone. The latrines are scrubbed, perfumed, and equipped with clean sponges on sticks, vinegar and lemon stocked. A candle glows, not for light but to preserve dignity. Courtyards, checked. Fountains, stable. Last time a general's wife nearly drowned in the koi pond. The koi are gone now. The wife, not so much. In the perfume room, jars of rose, cinnamon, and myrrh are laid out like a temple to luxury. You test one. Your wrist smells like a Valentine to Venus. Perfect. And the vomitorium, not a real one, but the retreat, curtained with a chair, bronze basin, and a discreetly placed attendant. Not named, but understood. And it too must be immaculate. No matter how wild the night gets, no one should leave feeling less than dignified, even if they do need to step out. That's your commitment. It's mid-morning, time for the most sensitive task, briefing the staff. A feast of this scale needs a small army. Most are slaves, some born to the household, others purchased. A few are paid entertainers. None woke, up wanting to work another noble's fever dream. You gather them in the atrium, 23 people each with a task. Cupbearers first, assigned to zones. Dilute the wine unless told otherwise. Falernian is potent, and some guests overestimate themselves. Fan-bearers, timing matters. Too strong, you put out a candle or reveal secrets. Too soft, guests overheat. Fruit attendants, yes, they exist. Keep trays full, peel grapes only when asked, and discreetly discard anything raisin adjacent. Musicians are already arguing. You separate the flute girl from the lyre player. Last time their squabble led to a performance so awkward it stopped dinner. The dancers lean against a pillar, dramatic and disinterested. You remind them, no improvising. We are not repeating the Bacchic fire incident. You catch the eye of the youngest, a boy, maybe 10, tasked with gathering discarded sandals. A nod passes between you. He understands. Finally, your speech. Tonight you are invisible unless summoned, silent unless addressed. You are elegance, rhythm, grace, or by Jupiter, you'll be scrubbing sponges until Saturnalia. They nod. The machine behind Roman decadence is prepped and running, for now. And just as you feel things might be under control, someone bursts in, breathless. That look. Of course, the musicians haven't arrived, naturally. You specifically booked a flute girl, 2 cithara players, and 1 backup aulos duo. Because of course you did. And yet, here you are, facing the dreaded silence at a party where silence might as well be illegal. You dispatch your most dependable runner to the Subura, the chaotic heart of Rome, where noise, strange smells, and regrettable choices converge. Find them, you instruct. Alive, coherent, and dressed. You don't bother asking why. They're late. You already know they're either still unconscious, too drunk to walk, or ensnared in a romantic situation that began at last night's Saturnalia rehearsal and never let up. The dancers are now complaining. They can't rehearse. Without musicians. The poets, meanwhile, are thrilled, imagining this means more stage time. You shut that down immediately. No one wants to hear Gaius recite his ode to his mother's 3rd wedding, while guests are nibbling on honeyed dormice. You start thinking, through alternatives. The house cook knows 2 songs on a chipped reed pipe. A nearby slave can carry a tune if kept away from the wine. Worst case, you hum while someone shakes a jar of lentils. You pray it won't come to that. Then, like apparitions through incense, the musicians arrive, fashionably rumpled, vaguely regretful, smelling faintly of spikenard and poor judgment. One flute player is missing a sandal. The other looks like she's had her heart broken by half the Senate. But they're here. You assign their posts, 1 in the atrium, 1 in the dining hall, 1 in the garden for ambiance. You stress no tempo shifts, no dirges, and absolutely no solos unless someone's actually dying. They nod, more or less. You exhale. Disaster. For now, averted, still you eye the lyre player. He's tuning it slowly, a little too fondly. It's the kind of affection that precedes a spontaneous love ballad that could derail everything. You make a mental note. Station him by the door. Easier to remove. If music is the party's soul, seating is its battlefield. You're not just placing bodies on couches, you're navigating feuds, flirtations, and enough silent tension to crack marble. The Roman triclinium, the classic 3-couch setup, can technically seat 9, comfortably 7. Fewer if someone brings a pet leopard. You draft the layout on a wax tablet, muttering like a general planning a siege. The center couch, the summus locus, is the place of honor, meant for the guest of highest rank. Unfortunately, both Senator E. Pizzo and Governor Crassus believe the title belongs to them. By lineage, marriage, and sheer ego, you must choose who gets the spotlight and who gets subtly suspect wine. You also need to manage lovers. Close, but not too close. Ex-lovers? They must be separated by a bowl of olives and an exceptionally dull but polite buffer. Then there are the seat fillers, charming but forgettable guests who maintain balance. A wealthy equestrian next to a moody poet, for instance. The equestrian won't follow the verses, and the poet will relish the attention. Perfect symbiosis. Courtesans are positioned near the lonely, the wealthy, or the newly single. 2 are assigned to the west side, not because it matters, but because it'll irritate Aurelia, and she needs something to complain about beyond the wine temperature. Naturally, chaos is inevitable. Someone will crash the party, switch seats, to make a point, or spill wine and demand a full reshuffle, so you leave a few cushions vacant for flexibility, plausible deniability, or a dramatic poet in need of a sulk. You step back to admire the plan like an artist gazing at his masterpiece, knowing, full well, someone will take a metaphorical hammer to it before sunset. You roll the scroll and hand it off with clear orders. Place name tags in wax and by Jupiter, don't let anyone move them. They will, of course, but you tried. If the orgy is a spectacle, the kitchen is its backstage, and it reeks of fire, figs, and focused panic. By mid-afternoon, the house runs like a choreography of culinary tension. The head cook, a former Navy man turned domestic general, is already berating an assistant about the proper filling ratio for roasted dormice. You hear, honey, poppy seeds, and I will throw you into the Tiber. Perfect. Right on schedule. Tonight's centerpiece. A whole roasted peacock, feathers reapplied for drama. It looks glorious, tastes like leather, and exists mainly so wealthy guests can say they chewed a bird that once strutted like nobility. There's also a pig, stuffed with live birds. Yes, really. It gets sliced open tableside so doves can fly. Out. The effect is impressive, unsettling, and only slightly traumatic for the doves. Platters of figs, dates, and honey cakes cover the counters. A pastry shaped like the Colosseum is being glazed. A slave nibbles a corner and is immediately reassigned to grape peeling. Nearby, someone stirs a vat of garum, that infamous Roman fish sauce brewed from fermented anchovies and the tears of anyone within range. You remind them, not near the bread. One ruined loaf sparked a 5-day feud between 2 magistrates last month. Wine is being sorted. Falernian for the elite, cheaper vintages for the less discerning. The amphorae are subtly labelled. You've been burned before, quite literally, by an offended consul with a refined palate. Every inch of the kitchen pulses with energy. Platters shined, sauces reduced, meats basted, pastries filled. You're everywhere, sniffing, tasting, orchestrating. This isn't a meal, it's edible theatre, expected to delight, intoxicate, and possibly survive being thrown during a disagreement. You pass the oven. The head cook shouts, "If one more dormouse falls, I'm feeding." Them to the peacock, you nod. Things are going well. Choosing a scent sounds simple, until you realize that in ancient Rome, perfume is a declaration. And tonight, the air must radiate wealth, seduction, and the kind of confidence only those who bathe in imported rose oil can afford. So you descend into the fragrance vault. Tiny alabaster jars line the shelves like sacred offerings. Myrrh from Arabia, cinnamon from Ceylon, saffron from Cilicia, and something experimental labeled essence of Nile lotus, which smells like a luxury. Swamp. You sniff each twice, then begin your olfactory strategy like a war plan. The atrium, citrus and cedar, clean, sharp, inviting. The triclinium, heavier notes, myrrh, frankincense, a whisper of musk. It should say, mistakes may happen tonight, and that's okay. The garden alcoves where secrets and garments will be shed, rose, cinnamon, and just enough spikenard to make someone swoon if they linger too close. Even oils for guests' hands and feet are warmed, because cold oil is for barbarians. Naturally, the latrines are scented too. You're not an animal, you warn your staff, go rich, not overwhelming. If a senator blames a nosebleed on the air, we've failed. One dancer requests a personal scent, something mesmerizing. You give her a blend once responsible for minor unrest at a Saturnalia banquet. You warn her. She grins. She'll wear it anyway. You walk the halls, trailing your nose like a trained hound. The air thickens with luxury, warm, spiced, lush. A perfumed breeze curls through the house like a secret. You nod. This is what indulgence smells like. With scent, light, and music in place, the house is nearly ready. All it needs now is the final ingredient, chaos. Late afternoon arrives, the air smells of roasted meat, citrus, and expensive intent. Every task assigned, every bribe paid. Even the harpist has been convinced to stay sober, at least until dessert. Now comes the final check. At the entrance, oil lamps flicker across polished marble, casting golden light that whispers, "Tonight, you're wealthy." A flower boy scatters petals. Gently, you remind him, don't overdo it. Last time someone slipped on lavender and sued. Bronze fountains bubble. Grapes are piled in impractically ornate pyramids. Cushions are fluffed, aligned with unnatural symmetry. You nudge one slightly. Decadence should feel effortless, even if it's taken 32 hours and 2 nervous breakdowns to stage. In the triclinium, low tables and reclining couches are perfectly angled. Every cushion dusted, perfumed, and rotated to hide the aftermath of last month's senator's birthday. You test a seat, soft enough to comfort, firm enough to withstand activities. You inspect the tableware. Silver goblets, bronze platters, blown glass amphorae. Bread is arranged like art. The cheese is sweating slightly. You decide it adds character. You discreetly remove a beetle from a fig. No one saw. It never happened. In the garden alcoves, the lighting is ambiguous. Just dim enough to flatter, just bright enough to prevent scandal with shrubbery. Incense drifts through the air, and for a moment everything feels dreamlike. You pause. The stage is set. You allow yourself a brief moment of satisfaction. The space is nearly perfect. A flower slightly out of place catches your eye. You fix it. A curtain hangs unevenly. You adjust it. One last look. Deep breath. You walk through the room like a guest. It's stunning, absurd, indulgent, flawless. You sigh, letting yourself believe you've got it under control. Then someone bursts in. The guest of honor is early, naturally, and he's brought 3 extra wives. Of course. You offer a tight smile, straighten your tunic, and step into the unfolding chaos. The first knock is less a knock and more a theatrical thud, followed by laughter. You breathe in. Here we go. A slave draws the curtain with enough flourish to impress but not distract. In strides Lucius Calpurnius Piso, as if the house belongs to him, though he hasn't paid a single denarius. He smells of strong wine, ambition, and cologne pricier than a soldier's yearly pay. With a wink and a grin, he says, "Tonight, my friend, we make Bacchus blush." Behind him trails a gaggle of courtesans, a mediocre poet, and a man with a liar you're fairly sure wasn't invited, but you let it slide. Guests stream in, flowing robes, gold-threaded tunics, embroidered sandals, and the kind of disinterested expressions only the wealthy can perfect. They've all shown up early to prove their status, and they've all had a drink to seem relaxed. You mentally adjust the wine allocations. Slaves offer perfumed towels and rosewater. One guest refuses both and asks for something more Dionysian. You hand him spiced wine. He calls it intellectual. You don't correct him. The garden buzzes with murmurs, introductions, judgments, whispers louder than conversation. Someone's already asked for the flute girls. Another eyes the fruit pile like it's his sworn enemy. You stay in motion, nodding, adjusting. You subtly separate 2 senators still feuding since the infamous goat incident. Governor Crispus is reclining a bit too comfortably near someone else's wife. The poets are gathering ominously in one corner. A dancer drifts into the center prematurely. You snap your fingers. Not yet, timing matters. Too soon, and the mystery fades. Too late, and the guests grow restless. You want slow build-up, simmering scandal. You pass a tray, discreetly pluck a grape, and continue. One guest is already snoring on a cushion, another is polishing a dagger. With butter, so far, so Roman-controlled chaos is the highest compliment, and tonight you're almost offended by how well it's going. The lyres are tuned, the flute girls are upright, if not sober, at least balanced. The dancers are oiling up like warriors. You give the nod. Entertainment begins. A hush settles over the triclinium as the first dancer steps forward. Gold veils, flutter, anklets chime. Her gaze locked somewhere between divine trance and total indifference. Her movements are elegant, entrancing. Just enough theatrical sensuality to make aging senators feel poetic. The flute joins her, its winding notes, weaving through the perfumed air like smoke. For a moment, everything sinks. Chewing slows, conversations hush, even the poet pauses mid-line. Then, inevitably, things derail. A guest calls for a reenactment of Leda and the Swan. Another demands Orpheus in the underworld, with real torches this time. A third proposes something with naked gladiators and interpretive juggling. You smile, nod, and assure them it's all part of the plan. Meanwhile, the mime twins, who were told to wait until the third wine course, enter early and begin miming. A seductive skit involving a fig and a sausage. Half the room laughs, the other half looks confused. One man claps as though he's at the theatre of Pompey. You resist the urge to pour wine directly into your eyes. The dancers press on. The musicians scramble. You catch the harpist playing in the wrong key. Her mournful improvisation suggests she knows. Then someone throws a peach. At first it seems accidental. Then someone throws back a fig. Now it's participatory. You quickly raise your hand, declaring it a symbolic offering to Bacchus. Applause. Crisis averted. You mentally note, no more throwable fruit. The performance picks up. Music, movement, laughter, whispers. A flame dancer performs by the pool. A flute girl stumbles. A guest proposes to a statue. It's beautiful, perfumed madness. And this is where you shine. Orgy planner, stage manager, mood coordinator, fig negotiator. You adjust a lamp, nod to a server, and glide silently like you meant for all of this to happen. By the third course, the wine isn't served. It's inhaled. Guests lounge across couches like gods, laughing too loudly, flirting too freely, forgetting who they arrived with. You've instructed the staff to dilute the wine strategically. Falernian is potent. One amphora can make a senator sing poetry or confess to tax fraud. You water it down for the ambitious, leave it pure for the hopeless. Diplomatic intoxication. Conversations shift from philosophy to ego. A young patrician compares his wealth to Jupiter's. A merchant brags about his villas and camel. A pearl-draped woman jokes about the emperor's feet. You pretend not to hear. If she's exiled, you'll miss her. She's excellent with seating plans. In another room, a poet courts a philosopher using verses that sound suspiciously plagiarized. You pass by just in time to hear, "Your eyes are like olives, dark and briny." You keep walking. Two courtesans are locked in a smiling battle of passive-aggressive compliments, each grin a blade, each laugh a veiled threat. One gifts the other a fig. You make a mental note. Remove figs before dessert. At the back, a drinking game erupts. Gladiator trivia. "Name 3 famous duels or drink," someone shouts. A minor senator guesses poorly, drinks and collapses. Into a pillow, reciting Virgil. In the garden, a guest gives a speech he thinks is profound. He's just describing how many slaves it takes to clean a fountain. No one interrupts. It's tradition. Wine flows like water. Aeri open like secrets. Cups never empty. Boundaries dissolve. Names are forgotten. Stories are embellished. The orgy portion edges closer. Still, you monitor the flow, adjusting lights, slowing music, preventing one guest from drinking perfume. Scandals simmer as the atmosphere boils. The structured decadence gives way to mythological absurdity. Titles are dropped. Senators call each other Apollo, Venus, or that guy with the peacocks. Someone crafts a laurel wreath from herbs. 3 guests are in the fountain. One is baptizing the others. You don't ask. Most hosts would panic now. You sip watered wine and begin quiet containment. The gladiator reenactment veers too close to the Neptune mosaic. You divert it with a tray of dates. Works every time. 2 guests are missing. You find them under a table, debating stoicism while massaging each other's feet. You cough. They pretend to be searching for a lost bracelet. In the west alcove, a flute girl bursts into tears. A guest asked if her instrument was in tune. She took it personally. You send over the backup lyre player and some pomegranate seeds. She recovers. In the atrium, a large man tries to woo a marble Venus, whispering sweet nothings and feeding. It olives. You quietly turn the bust away. He takes it as a challenge and recites poetry. Frankly, it's better than his earlier thoughts on grain tariffs. A torch is knocked over. You catch it before it reaches the tapestry. No panic, no sweat. You are the calm eye of a storm of satin wine and moral ambiguity. You move through the crowd like a priest of indulgence, adjusting, redirecting, calming. A glance, a raised brow, a subtle signal. Don't throw that goblet, Cassius. He doesn't. He knows better. This is your masterpiece, your chaos. Harness just enough. And it's not over yet. You hear the unmistakable sound of someone riding a wine cart down the hall. You sip again. Dawn is near. Dawn arrives like a dropped amphora, abrupt and loud. Sunlight spills across the marble, revealing the aftermath. Goblets overturned. A sandal in a fruit bowl, a nobleman asleep face first in a decorative urn. The lamps sputter. The perfume has faded to something faintly resembling regret. You step over a passed-out flute player and begin final damage control. Cushions are tossed about. Togas are draped over statues in ways that could be art or evidence. Someone's written a philosophical limerick on the wall in wine. It doesn't rhyme, but it's weirdly profound. In the triclinium, a pile of olives has been arranged to resemble the emperor. You consider keeping it, then kick it under the table. Slaves begin their quiet ritual. Stained linens are gathered. Half-eaten peacocks removed. Ashes from incense are swept into tidy piles. You give instructions in hushed tones. Loud voices might awaken more than just guests. Everyone is accounted for. No deaths, 1 sprained ankle, 2 surprise marriages. A handwritten note from a philosopher reads, "Thank you. I've learned things I must never speak of." You make a list titled Debrief. No throwable fruit, no poetry battles near flames. Keep Venus statue in storage. Seat Crispus far from legal minds. Someone groans from under a table. You acknowledge it. Offer no help. The party is over. Consequences are personal. The garden doves from the pig-burst performance still wander. You herd them gently and toss some candied almonds. They've earned it. You glance around. It was messy. It was a triumph. A diplomatic circus with grapes. And you survived. You retreat to your room, kick off your sandals, and collapse onto your mat. No applause, no recognition. Just the satisfaction of knowing the chaos remained hidden because you carried it. Tomorrow they'll say it was flawless. You'll sleep. Enticed by promises of prosperity, thousands of families tore up native grasses to plant endless rows of wheat. But they hadn't been warned. Those grasses were the only thing anchoring the soil. When the rains stopped in 1931, they didn't return. Year after year, the drought worsened. With no roots to hold it in place, the topsoil came loose, swept, away by wind in growing clouds. Dust storms arrived suddenly. 1 minute the skies were clear, the next darkness fell as if it were night in the middle of the day. Walls of dust hundreds of feet high swallowed entire towns. Livestock choked to death. Cars stalled. Children developed dust pneumonia. Mothers sealed windows with wet towels and crammed newspaper into door cracks, but the dust still seeped in, coating furniture, dishes, and lungs. People began calling it the Dust Bowl. On April 14, 1935, forever remembered as Black Sunday, a storm so immense swept across the plains that some thought the end of the world had come. A preacher in Oklahoma even told his congregation to go home and prepare for judgment. The storm spanned more than 200 miles, turned day into night, and forced a grim realization: they couldn't stay. The soil was gone, the crops were gone, the animals were dying, children were coughing up dust. What had once been a place of hope had become a graveyard of dreams. With pickup trucks patched together with wire and belongings strapped to the roof, families headed west, toward California, toward survival, toward anything better. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but they knew what they were fleeing, and it was gaining ground. The road west wasn't lined with opportunity, it was paved with desperation. As the Dust Bowl ravaged the plains, a mass migration began, unlike anything seen before in American history. Families crowded into aging Fords and Chevrolets, often with 4 flat tires and more children than seats. Mattresses, pots, washboards, and family heirlooms were tied down with rope. Their destination was a dream: California. Route 66 became their escape route, winding through New Mexico, Arizona, and into the Central Valley of California. For many, it wasn't just a road, it was a lifeline. Towns along the way swelled with travelers. Camps sprang up near gas stations. Any rest stop with running water became a temporary refuge. They came by the thousands. An estimated 2.5 million people left the southern plains during the 1930s. Most were small farmers, sharecroppers, and field workers. They left behind debts they couldn't pay, fields they couldn't salvage, and homes no longer habitable. Some never looked back. Others cried as they crossed state lines. But California wasn't the paradise they had imagined. Newspaper ads had promised jobs and fertile farmland. Instead, they found an economy already strangled by the Great Depression. Work was scarce. Wages were too low to survive. At the state border, California Highway Patrol officers began turning away those who looked too poor. Nicknamed Okies, regardless of their origin, these migrants were often met with suspicion or outright hostility. Locals feared they'd bring crime, illness, or worse, competition for already limited jobs. Still, they pressed on. They slept in makeshift camps known as Hoovervilles, named after the president many blamed for the Depression. Under tarps and cardboard, they bedded down in fields picking grapes, peaches, cotton, whatever was in season. Their children worked beside them, often under the scorching sun. A day's pay might buy bread or beans. But through hunger and hardship, hope persisted, hope that the next job might pay more, that California might still offer the promise it held. Going back wasn't just unthinkable, it meant giving up. And they weren't ready for that. Though the dust storms didn't follow them to California, the struggle did. Many families landed in overcrowded, unsanitary camps on the outskirts of towns and orchards. These weren't homes. They were makeshift shelters of tin, wood scraps, cardboard, and canvas. There was no privacy. Water came from shared pumps. Toilets were little more than dugout holes used by dozens. Disease spread quickly. Malnutrition hit the old and the young hardest. Babies cried for milk. Parents begged for work. The skies might have cleared, but the mood remained suffocating. Tensions rose. Locals saw migrants as threats. Growers took advantage, offering pennies for grueling labor, knowing someone desperate enough would accept. Wages dropped. Conditions worsened. Exploitation became the norm. Some found help in federal labor camps run by the Farm Security Administration. These government camps, like the one in Arvin, California, provided sanitation, health care, and a basic sense of dignity. They were clean, organized, even democratic. Residents elected committees and handled their own disputes. But there weren't nearly enough of them. Most families lived outside this safety net, in lawless camps scattered across the valleys. They faced police harassment, angry mobs, and the constant threat of eviction. Many were labeled vagrants. Their children were denied schooling, too sick or too overworked to attend, yet amid the hardship, a sense of resilience grew. People played music around campfires, told stories, shared meals. They sang songs like Hard Traveling and Do, Re Mi, to give voice to their suffering and their strength. These were not just laments, they were survival songs. They had lost land, homes and security, but they hadn't lost each other. With that came a sense of unity. They were poor, but not broken. Slowly, from their shared experience, something powerful emerged: solidarity. For the children of these migrants, childhood was a test of endurance. Toys were sticks, playgrounds were dirt lots, their classrooms were the fields, already strained. By the Depression, their lives were defined by added displacement. These children weren't shielded from hardship, they were part of it. Even the youngest helped pick cotton or grapes. Some were just 6 years old, their fingers blistered, and school was a rare luxury. Constant moves meant constant interruptions. And when they did make it to class, they were often bullied, called okie kids by peers, sometimes even by teachers. Their worn clothes, sun-bleached and passed between siblings, marked them instantly. Some schools refused them altogether. Others made them clean bathrooms before entering classrooms. Still, they adapted. They cared for siblings, fetched water, repaired shoes with scraps, and helped stretch meals made from beans and cornmeal. There were small moments of victory. Relief groups sometimes brought books, soap, or set up temporary schools. In the rare stability of federal camps, children could laugh, read, and learn, even briefly. It wasn't much. But for kids who had known only dust, hunger, and loss, it was a start. Some would grow up remembering not just poverty, but closeness. Though they had little, families were tight-knit. Storytelling, music, and shared chores created lasting bonds. They didn't have birthday parties or summer vacations, but they had one another, and many carried that strength into adulthood, finishing school, joining the military, finding steady work. They were the children of dust, but also of determination. As the migrants worked California's fields, their stories didn't fade. They turned into music. Song became both comfort and protest. When words weren't enough, melodies told their truths. This was most powerfully seen in the work of Woody Guthrie, himself from Oklahoma. Guthrie traveled with migrants, lived in the camps, and worked the same fields. His songs told real stories of real people and real suffering. Do Re Mi warned new arrivals not to expect paradise in California. California is a garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the Do Re Mi. Guthrie's music echoed through dusty camps, played on worn guitars and harmonicas. These were more than songs. They were oral history, reminders that no one was alone. He wasn't alone in this. Across the camps, migrants created their own songs about lost farms, cruel bosses, and dreams of better days. These ballads carried the truth when newspapers didn't. They chronicled injustice, pain, but also resilience and hope. This music helped spark a national folk revival. It exposed wider audiences to the harsh realities of migrant life, building empathy and fueling reform. These songs challenged the view that migrants were lazy or unwanted. Through melody, they proved otherwise, because when the land failed, when the work was brutal and the welcome was cold, there was still the music. It fed souls, gave voice to the voiceless, and reminded every man, woman, and child, you matter, you belong, you endure. Their voices lived not just in song, but in literature. One voice in particular would carry their story far beyond the fields. John Steinbeck, a California native, Steinbeck saw the migration firsthand. In The Grapes of Wrath, published in 1939, he followed the fictional Joad family on their journey from Oklahoma westward and into the harsh truths of migrant life. Though fictional, their story was built on real people. Steinbeck had visited camps, spoken to families, and documented their suffering. He was angered by what he saw: starvation, police abuse, stolen wages, and the loss of dignity. His writing wasn't gentle, it was urgent and unflinching. Steinbeck described it without flinching: babies wasting away, men breaking under humiliation, women straining through labor while concealing pregnancies. He didn't idealize poverty. He respected the people enduring it. In them, he saw a will to survive that refused to fade. The Grapes of Wrath sparked major backlash. Some critics branded it un-American. Growers and local leaders accused Steinbeck of exaggeration and defamation. A chamber of commerce in California even burned copies, but the public couldn't look away. Suddenly, the nameless Okies had stories and human faces. Steinbeck's work did more than raise awareness. It inspired action. His journalism, paired with the novel's impact, helped push the federal government to investigate labor conditions and improve treatment of migrant workers. He brought national attention to a crisis many wanted to overlook. Just as importantly, he preserved it. Long after the camps disappeared and the dust settled, Steinbeck's account remained, a testament for the children and grandchildren of Dust Bowl migrants. It proved their struggle mattered. In a time when poverty was meant to remain quiet, the Grapes of Wrath refused. It demanded the country pay attention, and many did. Because sometimes the most enduring resistance isn't a march or a melody. It's a story. And Steinbeck told it like no one else. As Dust Bowl migrants streamed into California and the scale of the disaster became undeniable, the federal government under President Franklin D. Roosevelt had no choice but to act. The suffering was too visible. Children were going hungry, camps were overcrowded, fields teemed with desperate laborers. The image of America as the land of opportunity was rapidly unraveling. Then came the New Deal, Roosevelt's sweeping initiative to pull the nation out of the Great Depression. It didn't fix every problem migrants faced, but it marked a crucial shift. Agencies like the Resettlement Administration, later replaced by the Farm Security Administration, FSA, were formed to provide aid, restore dignity, and develop longer-term solutions. The FSA paid special attention to displaced rural families. It built federally managed labor camps in California and beyond, structured communities offering clean water, sanitation, healthcare, schools, and even play areas. Though modest, these camps were havens for families who had slept in ditches or roadside tents. Residents elected leaders and resolved disputes internally, creating rare spaces of democracy and self-governance. These camps were also cultural centers. They housed libraries, musical performances, and lessons in English and agriculture. For many, they represented a new rural American identity, rooted in solidarity, pride, and autonomy. Beyond the camps, the New Deal created jobs through the works. Progress Administration, WPA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, though access remained difficult for itinerant laborers. One of the New Deal's most lasting contributions wasn't financial, it was visual. Under the FSA, photographers like Dorothea Lange documented the human toll of the crisis. Her iconic photo, Migrant Mother, became a lasting symbol of the Dust Bowl era. It gave the overlooked a face and the forgotten a voice. Still, relief didn't reach everyone. Bureaucracy, racism, and local opposition often excluded those most in need. Yet for many families, the New Deal wasn't just policy, it was hope. It showed that the government was finally willing to listen. And for once, help arrived before it was too late. By the late 1930s, Dust Bowl migrants weren't just surviving, they were organizing. Years of exploitation, broken promises, and degrading labor pushed them to act. Quiet frustration turned into collective protest. A wave of strikes, boycotts, and labor actions swept through California's agricultural valleys. Migrants demanded fair pay, safer work, and human dignity. It was risky. Growers had money, political influence, and law enforcement on their side. Strikers were jailed, assaulted, or driven away. Some were blacklisted. Others faced violence from hired enforcers. But despite the danger, they persisted. Organizations like the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union and the United Cannery, Agricultural, Packing, and Allied Workers of America, UCAPAWA, offered support. Though often underfunded and divided, these unions taught workers how to negotiate, protest peacefully, and record injustices. For many, especially women, joining a strike wasn't just economic. It was personal. Mothers marched, carrying their children. Teenage girls stood beside their fathers in picket lines. In some camps, entire families were evicted for organizing. Still, they held firm. In 1933 and 1934, massive cotton strikes erupted in California's San Joaquin Valley. Thousands walked out. Growers responded with threats and violence, but the protests drew national attention. Eventually, workers won a small wage increase, proof that resistance could bring results. Journalists and photographers documented the movement. Labor leaders like Luisa Moreno and Dolores Huerta, though better known for later efforts, built on the foundation laid by these early actions. Dust Bowl migrants weren't just desperate, they were resilient, political, and determined. Despite their accents and worn clothes, they refused to be silenced. They weren't merely victims of weather or poverty, they were shaping their futures and America's labor history. And their movement was only beginning. By the early 1940s, the Dust Bowl's worst had passed. Rain returned. The economy improved as World War II drove demand. Many migrant families settled, found steady work, and began rebuilding a sense of normalcy. But their journey left a lasting imprint. The children who once picked fruit under a blazing sun went on to serve in the military, use the GI Bill, and raise families. Some returned to farming, now with a deeper respect for the land. Others moved to cities like Los Angeles and Bakersfield, helping shape enduring working-class communities. Culturally, the migration reshaped California. Okies, once outsiders, became part of the state's identity. Their music, values, and speech blended with local cultures, giving rise to new genres, like the Bakersfield Sound, made famous by Merle Haggard, a migrant son. The pride and pain of those years endured, not always in words, but in songs, photos, and memories. The Grapes of Wrath became a staple of American literature, a reminder of cruelty and compassion. Politically, the era energized labor rights, environmental conservation, and the push for a social safety net. The lessons extended beyond history. The Dust Bowl exposed the perils of land mismanagement. In response, soil conservation districts were established and farming techniques improved. Environmental responsibility became part of national dialogue. The most lasting legacy, however, was resilience. These migrants had survived natural disaster, poverty, discrimination, and abuse. They were rejected and overlooked, but they endured, they adapted, and they helped shape the modern American West. Today, their descendants still carry those stories in family albums, faded photos, and folk songs. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point in American identity, one written not only in dust, but in grit. Imagine a world without paper, books, or Google, only memory and voice. That was reality for most human societies, for much of history. Long before written language, knowledge lived in stories, songs, and speech. Oral tradition wasn't just communication, it was civilization's foundation. In these societies, memory was sacred. Stories preserved laws, morals, identities, and survival strategies. Elders passed down creation tales, customs, genealogies, and taboos. Farmers learned planting cycles from seasonal chants. Hunters memorized landscapes through rhythm. Parents taught through fables. Everything vital, identity, history, how to live, was spoken. Wayfinders in the Pacific would chant stars in sequence, embedding entire navigation routes into memory, essentially creating a living GPS. But their expertise extended beyond astronomy. Navigators also memorized chains of islands, ocean swells, prevailing seasonal winds, stories of previous journeys, and their genealogies. For them, navigation wasn't just about reaching a destination, it was a reaffirmation of identity. Sailing was a way to retrace ancestral paths and deepen their connection to heritage. Oral tradition also served as a vessel for preserving cultural history. Myths of great migrations, creation stories, and tales of heroic seafarers were passed down with deep respect. These weren't mere tales for amusement, they were crucial for survival. They detailed when and where to travel, where fresh water sources lay, which reefs posed danger, and what signs to watch for. When European explorers reached the Pacific, they were astonished by the precision of these navigators. Some dismissed their skills as instinct or chance. But in time, modern researchers would uncover the impressive mental frameworks that made this knowledge possible. Today, Polynesian voyaging groups are bringing these oral traditions back to life, training new wayfinders to navigate without technology. Because in Polynesia, to remember is to find your way, to speak is to journey, to forget is to become lost at sea. Before writing became central to Greek culture, traveling bards moved from town to town, reciting epic tales that would shape Western literature. Among the most legendary of these was Homer. Whether Homer was one person or a blend of multiple voices, the Iliad and Odyssey remain powerful examples of oral storytelling. These were more than stories. They were performances. Recited aloud, often to the sound of a lyre, the Homeric epics were passed down from one bard to another, memorized in full. The Iliad alone has over 15,000 lines. How was this remembered? Through the structure of oral composition, formulaic. Phrases, repeated epithets like rosy-fingered dawn or swift-footed Achilles served as cues to guide memory. This method allowed for adaptation. Each recitation could be different depending on the audience. Local heroes might be added, or emotional tones adjusted. Oral tradition made the stories flexible yet consistent across generations. The Homeric epics weren't simply entertainment. They offered moral guidance, preserved historical memory, and shaped collective identity. Through the tales of Troy and Odysseus, Greeks learned values like honor, loyalty, cunning, and divine will. Performances reinforced cultural bonds and reminded listeners of their role in the larger narrative. Even after the invention of writing, these epics were performed for centuries. Once written down, they had already become deeply rooted in Greek thought, education, and spirituality, echoing in schools, philosophy, and drama. Their survival showcases the enduring power of oral memory. Though never carved in stone, they outlasted many empires. In ancient Greece, to recite Homer was to carry history in one's breath. Long before European colonization, indigenous peoples of North America developed complex civilizations without written texts. Their histories, legal codes, cosmologies, and scientific knowledge were passed down entirely through spoken word. For them, language was more than communication. It was sacred. Stories were passed with care, like ceremonial artifacts. Each nation, whether Haudenosaunee, Lakota, Navajo, or Hopi, had unique oral systems shaped by their land, beliefs, and social structures. Creation stories explained both the origins of the world and the moral frameworks for living within it. Animal tales taught values like respect and bravery. Historical accounts preserved migrations, wars, treaties, and early encounters with outsiders. These stories were often shared in winter, around fire circles or within longhouses, strengthening community and kinship. Storytellers, usually elders or spiritual leaders, were chosen not just for their memory, but for their integrity. Precision was key. Embellishments were rare unless required for ceremonial reasons. Many narratives followed strict sequences and formal openings. To misstate a story wasn't just a mistake, it was a sign of disrespect. Beyond mythology, oral tradition preserved practical knowledge. Fire management, farming methods, star tracking, and medicinal wisdom were all passed down orally. Elders taught the next generation when to plant, where to hunt, how to read the skies, and which plants could heal through stories, songs, and rituals. Even diplomacy was rooted in oral memory. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, one of the oldest participatory democracies, relied on the oral transmission of the Great Law of Peace, an epic constitution maintained through ceremonial speeches and wampum belts, not paper. When European settlers arrived, they often dismissed oral cultures as less advanced, failing to recognize the depth and complexity of these societies' intellectual and legal systems. Yet many of these spoken traditions continue today. Elders still pass down stories, songs, and sacred names. Some tribes are restoring endangered languages and storytelling practices, knowing that language loss threatens cultural survival. But as long as voices speak, memory lives on, and through it nations endure. Before sacred texts were bound and placed on altars, religious teachings traveled through speech. In almost all major faiths, the earliest teachings were spoken, memorized, and passed down orally by followers. In these traditions, the spoken word was not just communication, it was the channel of divine revelation. In Hinduism, one of the world's oldest continuous religions, the Vedas, its foundational scriptures, were passed orally for generations before being written. Sanskrit priests, known as Pandits or Brahmins, were trained from a young age to memorize every syllable and tonal inflection. The Vedas weren't just texts. Their sounds were believed to possess spiritual force. Precision was crucial, as mispronunciation could alter their intended effect. Thus, recitation was a highly disciplined spiritual practice. In Islam, the Quran is considered the literal word of God, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, not in writing, but through recitation. To this day, millions of Muslims around the world memorize the entire Quran, a practice known as becoming a Hafiz. Here, oral tradition isn't secondary to the text, it's fundamental. The rhythmic and melodic recitation connects believers to a lineage of faithful transmission. Christianity also began with oral sharing. Stories of Jesus, his teachings, parables, and miracles were first spoken in communities long before the Gospels were compiled. Early Christian preachers traveled from town to town, preaching, converting, and debating. Even after scriptures were written, most believers couldn't read. Faith was experienced through hearing, through sung psalms, spoken sermons, and shared stories. In Judaism, oral tradition forms the basis of rabbinic learning. The Mishnah and Talmud, foundational texts of Jewish law and interpretation, were passed orally through intricate chains of memorization and debate. Rabbis often committed entire volumes to memory before anything was recorded in writing. Across religions, oral tradition ensured that sacred knowledge stayed alive, dynamic, and communal. Even today, scripture is chanted, prayers are recited, and mantras are whispered. For the faithful, the divine is not only what is written, but what is spoken, what is remembered, and what lives through the breath of believers. Long before formal courts and written laws, communities upheld justice through oral systems. Legal knowledge lived in the minds and voices of elders, leaders, and councils. It was shared, remembered, and performed, not read from pages. In Gaelic Ireland, justice was entirely oral. The Brehon laws detailed legal codes governing everything, from land rights to honor disputes, were memorized by trained legal scholars. These judges didn't carry texts, but carried cultural memory, reciting legal decisions in precise, poetic language that preserved consistency and clarity. In sub-Saharan Africa, many communities, including the Igbo, Zulu, and Ashanti, relied on oral systems to resolve conflicts. Legal matters were settled in public gatherings where witnesses spoke, events were recalled, and judgments reached by consensus. These systems had structure. Memory served as law. Elders were the archives. The spoken word carried full authority. Indigenous North American communities also practiced oral justice. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy used condolence ceremonies and consensus-based decision-making rooted in the great law of peace, which was passed on orally and supported by mnemonic tools like wampum belts. Laws were often conveyed through stories, metaphors, and teachings that emphasized mutual responsibility and balance. These oral systems were adaptable. They could evolve with new realities without needing to rewrite rigid codes. They were integrated into daily life, often restorative rather than punitive. When colonial authorities imposed written laws, many dismissed these systems as backward, but they were anything but. Community-focused, historically rich, and geared toward maintaining social harmony. Today, some of these traditions are being revived. In countries like New Zealand and Canada, customary justice is being recognized and integrated into national frameworks, not as nostalgic gestures, but because they work. In oral law, justice is not just read, it's heard, remembered, and collectively upheld. At the heart of every oral tradition is the storyteller. More than just a narrator, the storyteller is a performer, a teacher, and a keeper of cultural wisdom. Whether in royal courts or village gatherings, they use voice, gesture, and emotion to turn memory into vivid experience. In oral cultures, storytelling is a trained skill with rules and purpose. Memory is the storyteller's key tool, but it's not memory as most know it. Many are trained from childhood, learning stories word for word, gesture by gesture, tone by tone. They often study under seasoned storytellers, listening for years, before ever speaking a story themselves. Accuracy matters. A single error can distort sacred teachings or historical truths. Yet adaptability is also part of their art. A skilled storyteller knows how to shift tone, timing, or content to fit the audience or the moment. Performance remains essential across cultures. In Japan, for example, rakugo performers sit with just a fan and a cloth, but bring entire stories to life through voice, expression, and pacing. In India, the Kathakali tradition weaves together dance, mime, and song to reenact epic tales like the Mahabharata. In West Africa, griots accompany their narratives with instruments such as the kora, transforming history into song. Storytelling, then, isn't fixed. It's performance, with memory as its script. In oral cultures, the audience doesn't sit idly by. They engage, gasping, laughing, reacting. They already know the stories, but return to hear how they're told. The delivery can refresh even the most familiar tale, making it feel new, even. Revelatory storytelling, crucially, is not just a form of entertainment. It serves as education, history, ritual, tradition, and often survival. A story might teach a child which plants are toxic, encode paths across arid landscapes, or outline cultural norms around family and taboo. Often, the meaning is layered in metaphor, decipherable only with time and growth. In this way, the storyteller becomes a cultural pillar. When they speak, they summon the voices of generations. They don't just recount the past, they embody it. In oral traditions, memory isn't kept in books, but in people, and when they speak, entire civilizations speak with them. In today's digital landscape of screens, algorithms, and cloud storage, oral tradition may seem sidelined. But it hasn't vanished. It's adapting. The digital era hasn't erased spoken heritage. It has amplified it, giving it fresh platforms, wider audiences, and renewed influence. Voice, memory, and story are again central, not just in ceremonies, but in podcasts, spoken word, voice messages, and viral videos. While the medium evolves, the impulse remains unchanged: to preserve through speech. In an unexpected twist, social media has revived ancient practices. TikTok creators share modern parables in under a minute. YouTubers breathe new life into myths for millions. Podcasts serve as the modern-day campfire, with listeners gathering through earbuds instead of flames, drawn to stories that instruct, entertain, or move. In many indigenous and marginalized communities, digital tools now record elders, revive, fading languages, and archive oral histories before they disappear. Technology is empowering once overlooked cultures. Smartphone recordings of grandmothers recounting ancestral tales or children singing traditional songs are shared worldwide. Vast archives of oral knowledge are now stored online, searchable, shareable. What once lived in the mind of a single storyteller is now accessible to thousands at the push of a button. But this progress raises questions. What happens when oral stories are captured in digital form? Can a recording convey the same depth, emotion, or spiritual power as a live performance? Will future generations still be able to feel a story, not just hear it? Digitizing stories offers permanence, but can also sever them from the intimate, living exchange they once relied on. A face-to-face story is shaped by tone, body language, silence, and the shared energy of a room. Can such richness survive in a file? The answer lies in finding a balance. Oral tradition doesn't need to disappear in modern times. It can integrate with them. Podcasts can safeguard memory. Live-streamed storytelling can gather global listeners. The format is secondary. What matters is the purpose. As long as people speak and others listen, oral tradition continues, not as a remnant of the past, but as a living bridge to the future. Its next chapter is being written not with ink, but with voice. Deep within Egypt's western desert, past rolling dunes and sun-bleached stone, lies the Siwa Oasis, an improbable haven and ancient enigma. Encircled by barren wilderness, Siwa is a thriving pocket of life. Freshwater springs bubble through groves of date palms and olive trees where none should exist. But Siwa's true legacy isn't its natural beauty. It's the sacred voice that once echoed from its sands. Near the remote borders of Egypt and Libya stood the temple of the Oracle of Amun, a revered sanctuary dedicated to one of Egypt's most powerful deities. Amun's influence stretched far beyond the Nile, merging with the sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra, king of the gods. But this temple was more than a spiritual site. It was a beacon. Men came not merely to worship, but to ask pressing questions and receive divine answers. Unlike the grand temples of Thebes or Karnak, the temple of Amun at Siwa was modest, built of limestone and mud brick, worn by centuries of desert wind. Its strength lay in its remoteness and mystery. Tucked within sandstone cliffs, it felt less like a monument and more like a divine whisper. Quiet, sacred, profound. The oracle was believed to speak through the high priest in trance-like states, or ceremonial rituals, delivering Amun's will. Those permitted near the shrine posed weighty questions about war, inheritance, and identity. Not only commoners, but rulers and conquerors ventured across harsh terrain to seek counsel. Siwa's power stemmed not only from its isolation, but from its autonomy. Though under Egypt's domain, the oasis had its own rhythm. Locals spoke a Berber dialect, and its priests operated with independence. The desert itself formed a natural barrier, both physical and symbolic. To reach Siwa was to prove one's resolve. To hear the oracle was to grasp something few ever did, divine certainty. The oracle of Amun at Siwa stood apart from its counterparts. Unlike those in Egypt's bustling cities, this one thrived in solitude, surrounded by silence and the ever-blowing desert wind. Its rituals were cloaked in secrecy. The high priest, channeling Amun, would retreat into a hidden chamber thick with incense and shielded by stone. There, in a trance, his voice was believed to carry sacred truth. Questions were asked in hushed tones. Answers once given were final. These messages were rarely direct, often cryptic, layered with meaning, similar to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. But Siwa's oracle was firmly embedded in Egyptian theology. It wasn't just a seer. It was the voice of a god who was also a king. People from across North Africa and beyond braved the desert to reach it. Generals, merchants, tribal chiefs, even monarchs arrived with offerings of incense, oil, and gold, seeking divine counsel. Some came for personal revelations. Others posed questions that could determine the course of empires. At night, the desert's silence was profound. The wind rustling through date palms sounded like whispers. Visitors often reported dreams or revelations. Whether by ceremony or suggestion, the oracle left a lasting impression. Political leaders, in particular, recognized its value. A prophecy from Siwa could validate a ruler's claim, justify war, or cement legitimacy. And eventually, one man would arrive with a question no other dared ask. Was he merely a king or a god? In 331 BCE, a young ruler journeyed into the desert, wearing a crown and carrying a question. He was Alexander of Macedon, later known as Alexander the Great. Having already conquered the Persian Empire's hold over Egypt and crowned as pharaoh, he now sought more than titles. He wanted divine confirmation, not from mortals, but from the gods. The journey to Siwa was perilous. The path from Memphis was unmarked, stretching across salt flats, scorching dunes, and treacherous terrain. Ancient Greek accounts say his party nearly got lost, saved by omens, ravens guiding their path, divine serpents or miraculous rains. Whether fact or fiction, these tales underscore the mythical aura of his mission. Why risk so much? Because Alexander's goal wasn't just domination, it was deification. Like Egypt's pharaohs, he desired divine ancestry. He wanted it believed, or known, that he was not just Philip's son, but Zeus Amun's. At Siwa, that claim could be granted. Upon arrival, Alexander was welcomed with honor. The priests, aware of his power, granted him access to the temple's inner sanctum. What transpired remains undocumented. Alexander later gave no specifics. Some say the oracle called him the son of Zeus. Others report a prophecy of victory. Regardless, Alexander emerged changed. He increasingly portrayed himself as a semi-divine being, demanding loyalty not just as a ruler, but as a god incarnate. The desert gave him more than affirmation. It gave him myth, and myth can reshape empires. The Temple of the Oracle at Siwa was not just a religious site, it was a cultural crossroads. Amun had long been a major figure in Egyptian religion, but with the rise of Greek influence, he underwent transformation. Merged with Zeus, he became Zeus Amun, a fusion of Egyptian and Greek supreme gods. This was more than a symbolic gesture. It reflected a deeper syncretism, a blending of beliefs and rituals when empires intertwined. To the Greeks, Zeus was the thunder-wielding king of the gods. To Egyptians, Amun was the unseen force, the breath behind creation, symbolized by rams, Horns. When Greeks encountered Amun, they saw a parallel and gave him a name they understood, Zeus Amun. At Siwa, this fusion held immense power. The priests, steeped in ancient Egyptian rites, became known across the Hellenistic world. For Greeks like Alexander, the oracle was not only a divine voice, but a political tool, a bridge between two civilizations. If he could be declared Zeus, Amun's son, he could unite Greek and Egyptian worlds under one divine lineage. The symbolism was unmistakable. Coins from Alexander's reign began to depict him with ram's horns, clear references to Zeus Amun and divine descent. This wasn't mere art, it was a calculated message. He was of the gods, not just blessed by them. This claim helped unify his vast empire, where religion and politics were closely linked. The cult of Zeus Amun expanded far beyond Siwa. Temples in his name appeared across North Africa, Greece, and parts of Asia. Pilgrims continued to journey to the oasis, drawn to a god who straddled cultures, both familiar and foreign. The temple became more than a place of worship. It was a cosmic meeting point, where myth, power, and legacy converged, where empires, deities, and destinies once converged. The oracle's voice echoed not from a single culture, but from a world undergoing profound transformation. In that shifting world, Zeus Amun held dominion. Unlike the imposing pylons of Luxor or the vast boulevards of Karnak, the oracle's temple at Siwa was modest in scale, yet immense in meaning. Built into the limestone cliffs of Agurmi Hill, it blended into the desert landscape as if it had emerged naturally from the rock. This was not a failure of ambition, it was intentional. The temple drew its power not from grandeur, but from mystery. Pilgrims would approach through winding paths and narrow entrances, ascending to a sanctuary carved within the hill itself. The complex consisted of a forecourt, a small hall, and, finally, the sacred inner chamber, the Holy of Holies, where the oracle was said to reside. This final room was reserved for the high priest and select individuals like Alexander the Great. Its simplicity veiled its sacredness. No towering statues or gilded altars, just silence and the invisible presence of a god. The temple's design served a deeper purpose, to humble and disorient. Narrow corridors and sharp turns slowed the visitor, encouraging bowed heads and cautious steps. In the desert where openness dominates, this space offered enclosure and calm. Light scarcely touched the sanctuary. Heavy incense filled the air. Even whispers carried an otherworldly weight. Scholars suggest that roof vents may have amplified the priest's voice into adjacent rooms, creating the illusion of divine speech. From the shadows a god would speak, not to the eye, but to the ear. Architecture here was more than functional. It was ritual. Surrounding the temple were other features: priests' quarters, ritual baths, and sacred gardens, sustained by natural springs. Though arid, Siwa was nourished by water, enhancing beliefs that the oasis itself had been blessed. From the hill, the dunes stretched out endlessly, a reminder of the temple's seclusion and spiritual gravity. This was no place for crowds, but for prophets, kings, and seekers. It wasn't meant to dazzle the eye, but to awaken the soul. In that silent, enclosed chamber, futures were whispered into being. Over centuries, as empires rose and fell, the oracle of Siwa began to fade. Not in myth, but in voice. The divine breath that once stirred desert winds grew still. By the time Rome took root in Egypt, the oracle's influence had waned. There was no dramatic collapse, just a slow decline. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his generals waged civil war. The political unity that had elevated the temple dissolved. Though Zeus Amun continued to be honored, the allure of pilgrimage diminished. Power shifted back to the Nile Valley and cities like Alexandria, where philosophical inquiry began to eclipse religious devotion. With Rome came new gods, new governance, and new concerns. Emperors acknowledged Egyptian cults in name, but the Roman preference for centralized bureaucratic religion left little space for the ambiguity of oracles. Shrines like Siwa's became relics, respected but no longer consulted. Christianity's rise across Egypt in the early centuries CE brought further change. By the 4th century, under a Christian Roman Empire, temples to ancient gods were shuttered or reappropriated. Oracles were condemned as deceptive or demonic. In this sweeping religious transformation, the oracle's faint voice was finally extinguished. The temple itself fell into neglect. Sandstorms weathered its stones. Priests vanished, rituals ceased. The god who had once spoken to Alexander and advised rulers now stood silent, buried by time. Travelers still came, curious about its legend, but found only quiet ruins. Yet the story didn't vanish. Siwa became mythic, a name spoken quietly by scholars and visionaries. The oracle was gone, but mystery remained. In its silence, the temple found a new kind of immortality, not through prophecy, but through memory, not through sound, but through stone. For centuries, the oracle at Siwa remained hidden from broader awareness, not buried in debris, but forgotten. The oasis itself was never abandoned. Its inhabitants lived in quiet continuity. But the sacred temple was no longer a destination for pilgrims. Its walls, worn by time, stood unnoticed. The legends, still shared locally, had faded from wider historical consciousness. This began to shift in the 18th and 19th centuries, when European explorers, driven by renewed interest in ancient Egypt, turned their eyes to the western desert. Siwa's remoteness, protected by harsh terrain and guarded by cautious tribes, made it difficult to access. But in 1792, the first recorded European Englishman William George Brown made the journey. Others followed, drawn by accounts of a lost oracle visited by Alexander. By the early 20th century, archaeologists began to systematically study the ruins. Aghermi Hill was identified as the likely site of the Temple of Amun. Though small, the structure aligned with ancient descriptions. A central chamber, thick protective, walls, and a commanding view over the oasis. Excavations were limited and careful. Erosion had damaged much, but parts of the stonework and inscriptions remained. Even in fragments, the architecture told its story. An altar, column bases, rooms aligned with celestial markers, all suggesting that this place had once held the ears of gods and kings. But more than archaeology, it was the mythos of Siwa that captivated imaginations. The idea that Alexander stood here, alone in the desert, hearing words that would shape empires, became a narrative that bridged fact and legend. Today, visitors still come, not to seek divine insight, but to feel the weight of that silence. The temple remains standing, though worn. Its stones are sun-bleached, its walls crumbling, but the air retains a sense of ancient presence. Ruins don't need voices to speak. They communicate through presence, through the questions they leave unanswered. At Siwa, the stones remember what history nearly forgot. Though the temple no longer serves its original role, Siwa itself continues to breathe with life, culture, and memory. Far from forgotten, it is home to a vibrant community who preserve traditions stretching back millennia. The oracle may be silent, but its legacy echoes in the town's daily rhythms. Siwans speak a unique Berber dialect, Siwi, distinct within Egypt and reflective of deep cultural roots. Oral storytelling remains vital. As in the oracle's time, elders pass down legends, family lore, and history. Their stories often blend Islamic faith with older customs in subtle but enduring ways. Many still speak of Alexander's visit, not from books, but as inherited memory. The town's architecture also holds echoes of its past. Traditional mud brick buildings, ideal for the desert heat, line the settlement. The ruined fortress of Shali, made of salt and clay, still looms over the oasis, a ghost from another era. These structures reflect a continuity that has withstood centuries of change. Siwa's sacred landscape remains central to its identity. Springs and pools are still revered. Cleopatra's Pool, a natural spring rumored to have once served the famed queen, draws locals and tourists alike. Rituals linked to fertility, harvest, and healing persist, often accompanied by Islamic prayers, yet rooted in older beliefs. Even marriage celebrations, like the annual festival at Gabal Dakrur, retain echoes of Siwa's spiritual heritage. Families gather, songs are sung, and matches are made, just as in ancient times when seekers came to the temple not only for divine guidance, but for connection and community. In the modern age, Siwa has become a different kind of pilgrimage site, not for prophecy but for peace. Travelers arrive seeking stillness, reflection, and escape from modern noise. They walk the palm groves, absorb the quiet of the desert, and connect with a place where gods once spoke from stone. Siwa reminds us that history is not confined to ruins or books. It lives in people, in traditions, in memory, and through them the oracle still whispers, not in thunder but in soft echoes. Though the temple of the oracle no longer shines in full splendor, its influence endures. For centuries it offered guidance and solace. Its silence today only deepens its mystery. Few sites in the ancient world embodied such sacred ambiguity, a place where uncertainty was itself divine, and silence was not absence, but presence. The oracle lives on, not through revived rites, but through the stories we continue to tell. Alexander's visit remains one of history's most fascinating moments. A mortal man, amid the desert, seeking confirmation of his divinity. Whether the oracle truly declared him a god, or merely allowed him to believe it, the effect was the same. Destiny took shape. Siwa's lasting allure lies in the blend of myth and history it offers. It invites timeless questions. Can humans transcend their limits? Can destiny be revealed? Does truth speak plainly, or only in riddles? And crucially, are we still listening? Modern visitors no longer come with imperial ambitions, but to find clarity, calm, and presence. The desert remains vast and unchanged. The temple, though decayed, still draws the curious. The same sun that burned Alexander's path now warms the footsteps of seekers. The same silence still envelops the sacred space. Siwa invites reflection, not because it provides answers, but because it has always honored the asking. The oracle, like all ancient voices, was never about prediction. It was about direction, insight, and transformation. The journey to the temple was never just physical, it was a rite of passage. One didn't merely arrive, they became someone new along the way. Today, as we navigate our own deserts of identity, purpose, and belief, perhaps the oracle still speaks, not as a voice from the past, but as a quiet thought in the present. Who are you really? And who are you becoming? The temple is dust. The voice has gone, but the question endures. And perhaps that was the true prophecy all along.